Masters in here today? Anyone know that song? That's an awesome song. It reminds me of like a school fight song, man. That's good. That could be our church fight song there. That's good stuff. We are continuing this week in going through the story, and it's a book that is comprised of scriptures, the main narratives from the Bible, going from Genesis to Revelation, and this week is chapter 3, going over the life of Joseph. And so just for those of you that are kind of following along, whether you're reading in your Bibles or you actually have the book, the story that Randy Frazee had compiled, if there's like a week or two that maybe you get behind, you can go to our church website, which is on the front of your bulletin, and there is a link that says The Story. And every week, tonight, after the service today, I'm going to compile kind of this week's main theme and the story. There's some video links that I'll post there. So if you kind of get a week or two behind, maybe you're traveling or whatever else, and you kind of want to see where we're at in the story, just go to the website and click on that link, and it'll be hopefully a useful resource for you. One of the things that throughout reading Randy Frazee's compilation of the Bible is he talks about how there's an upper story of God, that God has these purposes that he wants to accomplish in the world, and saving a group of people that he created to be in relationship with him that went astray at a certain part of the story, and even still there's a lot of that going astray that's happening today. That God's upper story is about saving and bringing people back to himself, and oftentimes in our lower story is where we kind of live out our lives. And that's where we kind of encounter good days and bad days and struggles and failures and things like that. And what we're wanting to do in reading the story is just get a glimpse as we go through our lower story of how God is using our lower story to bring his purposes about. How he can use a bad day and bring it to his glory. How he can take, some of the things that we mentioned in our prayer time today. Those are some very serious things. How God can work good through those situations. We may not see it in that day and in that moment, but we have to, as people of faith, we have to believe that God can work something good out of our lives, whatever may come about. And so, as we encounter the story of Joseph, I am reminded of one of my favorite television shows right now. Does anyone watch American Ninja Warrior? Yeah, there's a couple of you guys. Contestants on this show go through a series of obstacles that tests their balance, their speed, their core strength, their climbing skills, and their mental toughness. And I think it's truly one of the best shows on television, probably in a long time, for a number of reasons. And let me back that up and give you my thesis for that. While the contestants are competing against each other, there is an atmosphere of collegiality as they root each other on. What you'll see is that even though they're trying to be the best and make it to the end the fastest, that as their competitors are running the race, their competitors oftentimes wear their own hats and t-shirts that they make for themselves. Each contestant kind of has a nickname, and a lot of them will make a t-shirt. And their fan club out there that's watching them will wear those t-shirts, and a lot of their friends that they're running against will wear their opponent's merchandise and root for them as they are running the course. It's a show about people rising up beyond the status quo of life, of pushing boundaries, of doing things that you never thought you could do, of aiming and achieving for personal bests. I think that's a great thing. That's a lot of good qualities in that. Now, there are stories of contestants as you watch the show that, in the midst of their training, or maybe before they started training for it, maybe they had cancer. Some of them having a battle of cancer as they're going through this training. Others that have come from other sports that had basically career-ending injuries doing gymnastics or football or baseball, and here they find themselves running this course. Others who have overcome strokes and just other dark nights of the soul of going through depression and anxiety, losing a loved one, and then finding almost a sort of salvation in the daily rigors of training. You know what I mean by that? Kind of a salvation and kind of getting your mind off of those things and putting your mind on something to do, to be productive, to work for something in the midst of everything else in life crumbling down. Now, there are times of watching this show, watching the story of a contestant who has overcome great odds to make it onto the show, and you watch them, and just getting through one or two obstacles is it's nothing to laugh at. But you realize that in seeing these people as they're running the course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We are not seeing the hundreds, maybe thousands of failures that have come before in doing those same obstacles in a personal gym, or some of these people build their own obstacle courses in their backyards. We're not seeing the hundreds and thousands of times of falling and getting hurt, and the sweat and the blood and the imperfections that have led them to this course, to this national spotlight. We're not seeing that. And there's times in watching someone's personal story how they made a decision one day to get off the couch, to put down the ice cream, to go for a jog, to get a gym membership, to train day after day with great intensity and consistency. And I think to myself, as I take a bite of my Bluebell, I could do that. I could do that. I think to myself, what's stopping me from doing what they're doing right there and having a story of my own? And then I remember, oh yeah, I'm sitting on the couch eating Bluebell. That's what's stopping me. And as I say that I can do that, there's that reality that sits in and says, well, I can if I go through some struggles and some trials and some hurts and some aches. And anyone really can do that. But here's the thing, it's a narrow path. It's a painful path. And this is a concept that we're very familiar with, of having to be broken down before you can be built up again. There's this principle at play in life that we're all very familiar with, I assume, and it says that anything worth having or doing, it doesn't come about easily or without sacrifice or without heartbreak or without first having experienced some failure. But that's not always our perspective in the tough times of life. When we go through a rough patch in life, when it rains and when it pours, very rarely do you and I think, well, I'm going to come out on the other side of this stronger and better. How often do we actually think that through the tough times of our life? Now, can we admit, starting off here this morning, that as humans, that our perspective in this life is oftentimes tunnel visioned? It's okay to admit that we are tunnel visioned, that we don't see the whole picture, that we are human. We don't have the perspective of, say, someone like God, right? Living in our lower story, we don't have God's upper story perspective right away. Oftentimes that doesn't come till maybe a later time where we can kind of get a bigger picture of what's going on. Our basic human assumption in life is that when bad things happen, that either God has abandoned us or he is angry at us. Or if life is good, then God is happy with us and God is with us. But the story of Joseph challenges this entire assumption that, bad things happen, God is away, good things happen, God is with us. So we're early on in the story of God, as God is creating this nation for himself that he's going to use to bless the entire world with. And we come upon Joseph. He is the son of Jacob, also named Israel, the grandson of Isaac and the great-grandson of Abraham. And when we meet Joseph in the story, he is a wet behind the ears, 17-year-old teenager. He's the second youngest of 10 brothers, and consequently, he is his father's favorite. That sibling, the father's or the mother's favorite that I'm talking about, the baby of the family, the one for whatever reason, who knows, God probably doesn't even know, that they don't have to do any of the chores that you grew up doing. Did anyone have a sibling like that? And if you're not laughing, you're that sibling that I'm talking about. They seem to be pampered at every turn. Well, this is Joseph. This is our character. Jacob loves his son so much that he makes for him and him only this multicolored, Technicolor dream coat. All right, beautiful coat, expensive coat. And here goes Jacob making the same exact mistake that his father before him made and favoring Esau over him But now we see Jacob doing the same thing with his sons and picking out Joseph and saying, this is my favorite. To make matters worse, Joseph being the favorite baby of the family, even though he's the second youngest, he doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. He has these dreams that in essence, as he tells his brothers and his family that one day, all of you are going to bow down before me. How would you like to hear that from your pampered baby sibling who can do no wrong, who gets everything you never got, that one day you will bow down to them? And the story just continues to pick up from here. Joseph goes to check up on his brothers who are out in the field. They're working hard. And Joseph has to put on his coat and go out into the fields and see his brothers. And his brothers are not happy to see him. They're angry. They hate him. They despise him. And so as they see him coming in the distance, they begin to say, why don't we just rid ourselves of this troublesome brother of ours? We could kill him and nobody would know. And they say, well, okay, hold up a second. We can't really kill him. He's our brother. Let's put him in an empty cistern and let nature do the rest. Then we don't have his blood on our hands, as much as if we just killed him there. And so as they put him in the cistern, it's almost like a sign from God comes. These traveling Ishmaelites come by and they think, you know what? Well, we really don't have to kill him, but if we can make some money out of this, maybe we can sell him to these Ishmaelites who are going to Egypt. They'll take him. He'll be in Egypt. Whatever happens to him from then on, it's up to God. But, it's almost like washing their hands of the situation. Farewell. And so Joseph's on his way to Egypt. The brothers go back to their father, and they take Joseph's torn, multicolored coat. They dip it in animal's blood, and they take it to Jacob, and they say, look for yourself. What do you think happened? Jacob weeps. And he says, my son is dead and gone. And Jacob went into a very deep depression. Now put yourself in Joseph's shoes. Betrayed by family, he's sold into slavery in Egypt. And as this happens, life is like rock bottom at this point. Joseph was bought by a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was the captain of Pharaoh's guard. And it would be very easy at this point for Joseph to conclude that God has abandoned me. God doesn't care about me. If he did, I wouldn't be in this situation. But in chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 2, the story says that the Lord was with Joseph, even as he was sold into slavery. The Lord was with Joseph, and so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So while serving in Potiphar's house, Joseph, it wasn't woe is me, I'm just going to live out the rest of my days in miserableness. But he begins to live with integrity, and he did what was right, and he earned the privilege of being placed in charge of Potiphar's household, running his day-to-day affairs. And everything once again is looking good for Joseph. He's been living this upright life, and even in the midst of unfair circumstances, and now he's getting what he deserves. But as he rises up to the top, here comes Potiphar's wife, and she sees Joseph, and Joseph is a well-built and a handsome young man. You don't have to imagine what that looks like right now. You just look up straight at me, and you see what Potiphar's wife, he was a handsome man, and so she tries to seduce Joseph, and Joseph says, I can't do that to the Lord. I've got to remain humble. That's not right. And so Joseph flees. He runs away as fast as possible, but not before Potiphar's wife gets a piece of his clothing and goes to Potiphar and says, hey, he was aggressive towards me. And then what do you know? Joseph, back to rock bottom in the dungeon. Where is God, is what I might have said. God has surely left me again. In chapter 39, verse 21 through 23, the text says that while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there in the prison. So while in prison, Joseph's there. It's about 2 years into his time there. He meets the cupbearer for Pharaoh and a baker. The story doesn't tell exactly what they did, but they were in Pharaoh's doghouse. And so they're in the prison with Joseph. They get to talking and they say, hey, listen, we had some dreams last night and we need to know what they mean. And so the cupbearer comes to Joseph and he tells him his dream, and Joseph says, in 3 days you're going to be restored. Pharaoh will put all his faith back in you. All will be well. So the baker comes along and he's like, well, I've got a dream too. Could you tell me what this dream means? Joseph hears a dream and he says, well, in 3 days, your head is going to be chopped off. Your body will be impaled on a stick and birds will eat your flesh. All right. Well, never mind. All of these things come to pass. The cupbearer is restored. The baker is no longer. And before the cupbearer leaves prison, Joseph has a conversation with him. Hey, when you get back up there and you talk to Pharaoh, let him know about me. I helped you out. Let him know about me. 2 years goes by. 2 years after that, he's still in prison. And lo and behold, Pharaoh now has a dream of his own. He's perplexed. He calls all the people around who can interpret this dream, and no one can interpret it. And all of a sudden, a light, the cupbearer's there, right? And the light goes off in his head. Oh, there was this guy named Joseph. He was in the prison. He told me what my dreams meant, and it came true. Let's bring him out. So Joseph gets this standing in front of Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him his dream. Joseph says, okay, this is what it means. The nation of Egypt's going to have 7 years of bumper crop, extra resources, extra food, followed by 7 years of extreme famine. And so Joseph says, so what you need to do is put somebody in charge of kind of the storehouse, save up for 7 years all of the excess, and then when we go through the famine, we'll live through the famine, we'll survive. Brilliant idea. Joseph is taken out of prison, and he's now, through this journey becomes, as the story tells us, that he's now second in charge in Egypt, just under Pharaoh. Isn't that amazing to go from where he was to second in charge of all of Egypt? And so the 7 years of bumper crop comes, and then the famine sets in, and the famine begins to ravage not only Egypt, but the surrounding lands in Canaan. And guess who's living back in Canaan? You have Joseph's family. And Jacob says to his sons, I want you to go to Egypt. I want you to go and bring resources back for us so that we might live and survive. And so, oh, sweet justice, how the tables have turned. The brothers, who do they have to ask for food? Have you ever been in a tables have turned situation and you were in the power seat? Have you ever been in that situation? It feels good. There's a lot of options. You can weigh your options. What do I do? Do I have mercy right away? Do I toy with them, with Joseph, which Joseph does? He toys with them a little bit. Do you flat out send them packing, put them in prison? And after some conversations with his brothers, Joseph sends them back to Egypt, and he says, hey, bring back my youngest brother, Benjamin. So the brothers go back to Canaan. They're with their family, and they're living off of what they brought with them, and they have to end up going back to Egypt. And they bring back Benjamin with them, and the story really ends in a heartwarming fashion. There's more details to it, but before Jacob dies, Joseph's dad, before Jacob dies, he's able to see the brothers reunited with Joseph. He's able to know that before he dies, his family is set for years to come. Because in this story, Pharaoh tells Joseph to, hey, bring your family, bring your dad from Canaan, settle him in Goshen in the most fertile areas, and basically the best neighborhood of Egypt, and your family's going to live and thrive and prosper in Egypt. Give them whatever they need. And so then Jacob, he ends up dying of old age. The brothers were now worried that Joseph would take his revenge on them. Wouldn't you be too if you had sold your brother into slavery, and really the one person standing in between you and sweet justice is now dead? And so the brothers, they go and they bury their father back in Canaan. They come to Joseph and they say, hey, by the way, Dad wrote out a will, and his will for you is not to kill us. His will for you is to forgive us. And it's interesting in the story, there's a number of times when Joseph, in interacting with his brothers and kind of weighing that, what do I do with them? How do I treat them? Do I forgive them? That he leaves the room and he weeps bitterly out of sadness for this situation. There was a very real struggle in Joseph's heart through all of this to exact revenge or forgive. I mean, if you think about it, he was sold into slavery as a 17-year-old, and he lives 13 years of heartache. Even as he rose to the top of Potiphar's household, and even as he was second in charge in all of Egypt, there was still that deep wound in his heart that his own family would do that to him. He had to ask on numerous occasions, what was the purpose of all of this? What good can come out of this? Think about this for just a second. Joseph was rejected by his own. He was sold for monetary gain. His robe was covered in blood, and his father turned his face and wept. He does good, but yet he suffers for it. And even in all of this predicament, he recognizes that God is using this situation. And through this one man, Joseph, a whole nation is saved. Thousands of years later, there would come a man, Jesus of Nazareth, born from this nation. This man, Jesus, was rejected by his own. He was sold for monetary gain. His robe was covered in blood. His father turned away at the moment of crucifixion and wept bitterly. He did good, yet he suffered for it. He sees his predicament as God's will. And through this one man, Jesus Christ, it was done so that all the world might come to know him and to receive salvation. Sometimes we don't understand God's perspective in our lower perspective story. In closing, I love Joseph's response to his brothers as they come to him and they say, hey, by the way, Dad doesn't want you to kill us. The verses that were read this morning, they say, hey, please forgive us. And Joseph responds to them. He says, don't be afraid. He says, am I in the place of God? I'm not in the place to God to exact revenge or to get back at you or to judge you or to dole out justice. That's not my place. You intended harm for me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. The fact is, we just have no idea, whatever we're going through in life, what God is going to bring about through those situations that maybe you're going through something today. We serve a God who is in the business of taking lemons, and you know the rest. He turns it into lemonade. The same God who determines the number of stars and calls them by name, he is the one who heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He's the one who's with them in prison, with them in captivity. He didn't abandon Joseph or Jonah in the belly of the whale. He didn't let Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walk through the fire by themselves, or David to face Goliath by himself. Indeed, that which people or life intends to cause you harm, lift up your faith and see that God would want to cause some good in your life, to bring you out on the other side stronger and better, but more importantly, trusting him more fully. That's the end game. It's that we get through these things and we trust him more, that we love him more. Romans 5:4, Paul says, we glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance brings about character. You saw Joseph with that character of refusing Potiphar's wife and doing what was right, living in integrity, and character produces what we need the most, hope, through those situations. Hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit given to us. So my question for you, for me today, is what perspective or what lens will you choose to view this life? Will you view it solely through our lower story perspective? Or will we choose to look at, as best we can, God's upper story perspective, that in the bad, God can bring about something that is good? Hear this good news in closing. Romans 8:28, you know this verse. Let it sink in your heart. Let it encourage you and build up hope today. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This is not a verse that says everything is going to go well for you, just, that if you are a Christian and you've said a prayer, you've done this, that it's all going to be easy sailing. We know that, but we are promised of a God who's faithful, and he invites us in the toughest of times to trust him. And it's in doing that we find life and hope and joy. Be encouraged today, friends. It's in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.